This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. Our budget review process, which is ongoing, we're obviously in an unprecedented situation in the COVID-19 crisis, but the city's also got to have a budget finalized by the end of June. So it's a 27 hearing process over 6 weeks. We have a number to look forward to, and we really encourage you and all residents to be involved in the process. So there are a number of ways that you can add your voice. One is to attend a hearing like this virtually and give public testimony. So we take public testimony at the end of each of these hearings, and you can go to the public notice online, email staff, join through the Zoom link. You'll then be in the Zoom waiting room until the end of the hearing when we let people in to testify. We ask everybody to identify themselves and limit their comments to 2 to 3 minutes, just to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. If waiting to the end of a hearing isn't convenient to you, you can actually go to boston.gov/council-FY21Budget and submit a 2-minute video. You can submit written testimony that way. You can also email written testimony to ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's ccc.wm@boston.gov. And we'll take testimony in any language and commit to getting it translated for the benefit of the whole council. You can also testify at one of the dedicated public testimony hearings. So on May 26th, which is a Tuesday at 6 p.m., we'll be having one focused on the BPS budget. And on May 28th at 6 p.m., we'll be focused on the rest of the city budget. You can also informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag #BOSSBudget, BOS budget. So today's hearing is on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. That set of dockets collectively make up the mayor's proposed FY21 budget, which we are considering and scrutinizing. And then additionally, today's hearing will also consider docket 0603, which is the order to authorize the limits for the Environment Department Revolving Fund. Our focus areas today will be the Environment Department itself and the Conservation Commission within it, and then the Environment Revolving Fund, the docket 0603 that I just mentioned, which is related to distributed energy resources. I should note that the Landmarks Commission is also a part of the Environment Department and as such included within its budget. And we'll be having a dedicated hearing for landmarks that will immediately follow this Environment one. So we will be discussing that today, but I would just ask councilors to hold their landmarks related questions to that second hearing. We're joined today by Chief Chris Cook, it's a tongue twister, Chief of Energy, Environment and Open Space. And along with him by Carl Spector, the city's commissioner for the Environment Department, Allison Brezius, Director of Climate and Environmental Planning, and David Musselman, the Director of Municipal Energy for the city. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Ed Flynn, District 2, Councillor Frank Baker, District 3, Councillor Matt O'Malley, District 6, Councillor Liz Breeden, District 9, Councillor Lydia Edwards, District 1, Councillor Michelle Wu at large, Councillor Andrea Campbell, District 4, and Councillor Anissa Sabi George, also at large. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Chief Cook and his team.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will defer to Commissioner Spector for opening remarks in order to keep our remarks brief so we can get to the council's questions as quickly as possible. I do want to take this opportunity, though, to publicly acknowledge and thank the hardworking people of the Environment Department. Through this difficult time, they've actually kept the city's business, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation goals moving at an incredible pace. I'm very, very proud to be associated with them. And with that, I'll defer to Commissioner Spector for opening remarks.
Thanks, Chief. And thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to discuss with you the mayor's proposed budget for the Environment Department. The Environment Department leads the city's work in climate action, historic preservation, energy management, wetlands protection, archaeology, and much more. The department supports the Conservation Commission, the Landmarks Commission and its district commissions, and the Air Pollution Control Commission. Working closely with our colleagues in other municipal offices, We oversee capital projects in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate adaptation. Like our colleagues across City Hall, the Environment Department is working hard to adjust to the changed circumstances of the COVID emergency. Although our department does not have any direct responsibilities related to meeting the immediate needs of Boston residents, many staff members have volunteered to assist other departments who have been facing great demands on their services and resources. In addition to that, as the Chief mentioned, we are ensuring that we meet all of our own responsibilities. All staff are working remotely with only occasional visits to City Hall. Our commissions were the first ones to hold virtual public hearings, for which the staff deserves enormous credit. Although you know from your own experience that these can sometimes be awkward and things can go wrong, on the whole, we have been able to get the public's work done in a public way, and we're getting better at it. Our longer-term planning efforts and informal consultations similarly are moving forward. The past year has been very productive for environmental initiatives. To mention just a few highlights, Mayor Walsh released the third update of the city's climate action plan in October, centered on the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. We completed the first phase of our internal energy efficiency initiative, the Renew Boston Trust, which is already saving the city over $600,000 a year and reducing its carbon emissions. We began work on 2 grant-funded projects to catalog and increase access to the city's archaeological collections. Working closely with the City Council, we together enacted the new Wetlands Protection Ordinance, and our commissions collectively reviewed over 1,500 projects, from replacing windows in a historic building to rebuilding the Long Island Bridge. I'm pleased to tell you that the Mayor's proposed budget continues his strong support of the Environment Department and its programs, even at this time of budget stress. The operating budget includes an increase of 3 positions to strengthen our efforts in climate planning, wetlands protection, and waste reduction, as well as additional contract funds for those purposes. Overall, the proposed budget for environment would rise from $3.2 million to $3.4 million. In addition, the Mayor's proposal also includes important investments in the work of other departments that have significant environmental benefits for Boston. On the capital side, the proposal increases the funds authorized for Renew Boston Trust, the Mayor's multi-year, multi-phase initiative to decrease energy use and increase renewable energy in municipal buildings. The capital budget also includes $3 million for a climate resilience reserve. The purpose of the reserve is to support the addition of climate adaptation elements to capital projects. As you know, the city, through BPDA's Article 80 review and the Conservation Commission's review, is now asking projects to prepare for the next 50 years of projected climate change. In line with December's executive order on carbon neutral municipal buildings, the Mayor wants to make sure that city facilities lead by example in climate adaptation too. The Environment Department is the recipient of significant grants from the federal and state governments and philanthropies. Last year, our archaeology program received grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and from the Community Preservation Committee to expand the documentation and accessibility of its collections. A grant from the Barr Foundation supports our climate adaptation initiatives. We also have a new grant from the Commonwealth to install PV panels and battery storage on the fire department's Moon Island training facility, where firefighters from around the metro region will be able to become familiar with this sort of equipment. This grant awaits the Council's approval of the accept and expend order. In addition to these exciting projects, other important goals for FY21 include launch of the Community Choice Electricity Aggregation Program, promulgation of modified regulations for the Boston parking freezes under the Air Pollution Control Commission, completion of coastal resilience plans for downtown and Dorchester, and launch of Phase 2 for East Boston and Charlestown, completion of regulations needed for the new Wetlands Protection Ordinance, continued implementation of the 2019 Zero Waste Plan, and release of a proposal for a building carbon performance standard as outlined in the Climate Action Plan. This still leaves out a lot of important activity, but let me stop there, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I am going to jump right into questions from colleagues. Again, I'll reserve mine as chair to the end of the round. So just a quick reminder for colleagues and also just for our guests who have joined us. I will, at 5 minutes, I'll be holding up my gavel. After a 2-minute grace period, alarm will go off. For Members of the administration, if the alarm goes off when you're talking, please feel free to finish your sentence, finish the idea, but it is just an indication that we're trying now to move on. And I would say, obviously, our goal is to keep each round efficient so that there can then be another round of questions, and everybody has a chance to ask many things on their mind. I also want to just call colleagues' attention to the fact that yesterday evening, the answers from the Environment Department to some of the questions that we had raised in our working session went out over email, so people may want to pull up that document just for reference. And without further ado, we'll go to Councillor Michael Flaherty, and then I'll put the rest of the order in the chat. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, it's great to see the Chief and the Commissioner. Good morning to everybody. And also, I know that we get some folks from Allendale Coalition. We worked very closely with them on the local wetlands ordinance. Councilor O'Malley and others were so instrumental in that. So I want to give everyone a shout out and recognize their tireless advocacy. I know that some of the questions I had submitted to the chair in the working session have been answered. One of the questions that the response was that they would like to answer verbally was that, just curious, we're looking at all departments, Chief and Commissioner, to identify whether or not there's any surplus, particularly from the fourth quarter as we sort of turn the corner. And so I know that some departments have been taxed more than others in the COVID-19 response, and others haven't. We know, for example, with our public works, there could be anywhere from $10 to $12 million in surplus because we didn't really have that much snow this year. So not quite sure whether or not that has hit this department in ways that it's hit other departments. So if you could maybe just to speak to whether or not your department is running a surplus, and if so, have those funds been considered or dedicated to the COVID-19 response. In addition to that, I had asked about the trouble spots with respect to climate resiliency, and I meant more like the hot spots. Fort Point Channel clearly is a hot spot. Carson Beach and Moakley is a hot spot. So we've identified some hot spots based on worst case scenarios, and just like to maybe see if you could expand on the hot spots. And then that's it. And then obviously I'm going to stay on. I will defer, and obviously the resident sort of environmental guru, if you will, is our colleague, Councillor Matt O'Malley. So look forward to listening to his questions, and we'll support his efforts and initiatives any way I can, just given that he's been paying attention to detail in this space for many years now. So with that, just a couple questions from me, and I'll sit back and listen.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll defer to the Commissioner on any surplus for the department, although I do know that we can further research this issue for your upcoming council hearing. I think it's next week, but Carl, is there anything you want to add regarding surplus?
Yes, we've not faced any extraordinary costs because of the COVID emergency. So we are within our budget. There is likely to be a small surplus, and I would defer any questions about how the budget department is going to handle that, whatever surplus is left over, to the budget department. Again, there is likely to, we probably are running a small surplus this year.
Thanks, Commissioner. On Fort Point Channel and Moakley and Carson Beach, I can speak briefly to that, and then I think the Commissioner can continue in relation to Climate Ready Dorchester. We are very focused on those two areas, and that's why it's the focus of the FEMA grant application that we currently have in to berm up Fort Point Channel, and we have those designs, and we feel like it's a good design to provide near-term and the building blocks of a long-term strategy at Fort Point, and obviously very near and dear to the Parks Department's heart, but also the Environment Department's heart. The Moakley plan, the vision plan there, is fully integrated with Climate Ready Dorchester, and the reason why those two projects are so important is they form a critical pathway to not only flood those immediate neighborhoods. In the cases of Moakley, it's a park that's surrounded on two sides by public housing, but those flood pathways in out years, if we take no action, actually begin flooding other neighborhoods and other transportation and critical infrastructure. So those, in your words, Councillor, those are definitely hotspots, and that's why they've been such a focus. not so much because of their just inherent vulnerability, but really the socially vulnerable populations that they make vulnerable over time. Commissioner?
Yes, so Councillor, in the 2016 Climate Ready Boston report, it had a sort of a high level analysis of where the hotspots were and where the critical areas to address were, and some we've already mentioned, and we described some others. Of course, with our neighborhood planning that we're doing now, we're identifying hotspots almost block by block. So the first neighborhood plan was in parts of East Boston and Charlestown, and we identified hotspots there. And so, for example, one of the very first measures we took when the chief was still the commissioner of the Parks Department was to put a deployable flood barrier in the East Boston Greenway, so we could address immediate risk that we identified. And that's accompanied by longer term plans to how to address it in more comprehensive and more far reaching ways. Neighborhood plans for downtown and North End and for Dorchester will be coming out, we expect, later this year. And you can see very detailed look at those neighborhoods, in addition, a detailed timeline of where we have to take action and how it relates to the whole set of actions that we're taking across the city. I would also say that, you know, we are very mindful that we have to think about the hotspots, as it were, for heat waves and more intense heat in the city. And we're working very closely with our colleagues in the Boston Water and Sewer Commission to think about where are the critical places to take action in regard to more intense rainfall that is happening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, obviously, you've always been very responsive. I'm excited to see the line item for climate resiliency in the budget. And if we do have a surplus, my ask would maybe we boost that number just a little bit. I know that a lot of folks wanted to see it around 5 million. It's at 3 million now, but just food for thought. If some money can be deflected to the COVID-19 response, if necessary, great. Otherwise, we might have an opportunity to bump up the climate resiliency fund. So thank you for all that you do for our city. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. Next up is Councillor Flynn, and then it'll be Councillor Baker, and then Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Block, and thank you to the Commissioner and the Chief and the dedicated staff for the Environmental Department. We appreciate the excellent work that you're doing. I know you talked about and I'm glad you mentioned the Water and Sewer Department playing a key role as well as it relates to the issues down at the Fort Point. That's a critical department, not only in the Fort Point area, but in the South End, especially as it relates to climate resiliency in those changes. What type of outreach are you doing with the water and sewer, and how is that going? How is that communication going?
Well, we do a lot of coordination with water and sewer. As yet, we haven't done any joint outreach, though the representatives of water and sewer often participate in, for example, the neighborhood open houses that we've had around the neighborhood plans that we're developing, and some of which you've attended, of course, Councillor. So we have, again, a very active and robust coordination and cooperation and even planning effort with water and sewer. They've been part of our climate planning efforts for 12 years, and we do involve them in the detailed planning because of the importance of not just separately of flooding from precipitation, but how that could interact with coastal flooding. And because the measures that we're taking to address inland flooding from precipitation often look at green infrastructure, which is also important in addressing the effects of heat. So it's a very multidimensional coordination and coordination of our work with water and sewer, and of course other departments too.
No, thank you. That's helpful. I'm also glad you mentioned the Groundwater Trust. That's also another important agency. So I'd like to talk to you more, more over the next couple months about those two agencies, how we can continue to work together. And I know you work on other issues, especially air pollution. That's an issue I focused on over the last several years. Noise pollution as well is a critical function of your department. I was with Chief Cook in Chinatown last summer when the United Scientists completed a study and said Chinatown has the highest rate of asthma respiratory issues of any neighborhood in the state. So air pollution is a critical issue for me because it's an important issue for my constituents. And in that area along Andrews Square in South Boston, in Dorchester, it heads into Roxbury a little bit. That's another key critical area. So I just want to know what are some of the initiatives you would like to work on as it relates to air pollution.
So Carl, if it's all right, I could jump in briefly and then maybe perhaps you could talk about the Air Pollution Control Commission. But just to reiterate what you said, Councillor, the administration has been on record publicly. We're in complete disagreement and in fact opposition to the deregulation that the EPA has taken on air quality standards. We think it's the wrong move for the president to take that action. And so we have publicly opposed that, not only as part of our membership with Climate Mayors, but also with reaching out to the Boston delegation as well. And for the very reasons you just said, that, similar to the COVID crisis that we're experiencing right now, our most socially vulnerable populations are vulnerable from these respiratory diseases. And so we think there's inequity baked into those decisions, and we're opposed to it. So we're very excited about some of the initiatives that were taking place in the city. One that I'm sure we'll talk about in this hearing, but also in the parks hearing, the Urban Forestry Master Plan is one of the actions we can take to expand tree canopy in these neighborhoods that are most affected, to try to cut down on some of the particulate matter from pollution. With that, I'll defer to Carl on the rest of the answer.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for your attention to these issues. They are very important. That we in the Environment Department have been paying attention to that research about how air pollution levels vary across the city. For many years, I've known the scientists who work on the Union of Concerned Scientists report that you mentioned, and been talking with them for a dozen years or more. And it's very important. Most, as I know you're aware, most of that pollution arises from vehicular traffic. And our way of addressing that directly is through the type of planning that is being led by the Transportation Department and is reflected in the Go Boston 2030 transportation plan that came out a couple of years ago. That plan is absolutely congruent with our climate action plan, because it also leads to greenhouse gas emissions. So addressing congestion, addressing air pollution, and addressing carbon emissions from transportation, it's all the same set of issues. And again, most of the work is being led by our colleagues in the Transportation Department. We have a small part to play through the Air Pollution Control Commission, which administers parking freezes in downtown South Boston, and a limited one in East Boston. And the idea is that by controlling the number of parking spaces available, we have some control over the number of people driving into Boston. We are in the process of amending the regulations of the Air Pollution Control Commission for the parking freeze right now to make them more consistent with each other. And we are looking at the commission has asked us to examine the possibility of establishing a uniform fee for those spaces. And the permits under the Air Pollution Control Commission for the freezes also include a variety of traffic demand management and other issues to promote bicycles and other modes of transportation too. And again, we work very closely with our colleagues in the Transportation Department and in the BPDA to make sure that we have a consistent set of measures, a consistent set of guidelines to increase the shift to public transportation, non-polluting sources of transportation, and then and also to encourage the switch to electric vehicles, also to reduce air pollution from vehicles on that way.
Thank you. I know my time is up. I wanted to say thank you to the team for your great work and looking forward to continuing to work with you, especially on air pollution and noise pollution related issues and climate resiliency as well. So again, thank you for your professionalism and hard work.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chairman Barr. Good morning, everyone. Carl, hi, how are you? Chris, how are you? Just 3 points that either Carl or Chris you could talk about. And you touched on it a little bit, Chris, in the planning around Moakley Park. Can you go a little further into that and see and tell us how the planning, how we're coordinating with the state on that whole stretch? I mean, for me, it starts at Moakley Park and goes all the way into Neponset. Can you just talk a little bit about that planning? That's one thing. The second thing is, where are you guys on, and I talk to Chris Osgood quite often about it, the way the future is with recycling and composting. Do you guys have an official position or just thoughts on what we should be doing there? I think we should be building our own infrastructure, whether it's for recycling and or composting. Building our own infrastructure would allow us to kind of have some surety in what we were going to be paying, not just once we have that infrastructure in place, but there'd be surety in 10 years once we own the infrastructure. And then my third point was trees. Chris, you and I love to talk trees with you. I know the Parks Department has about $1 million that they can. Is that all we plan on with the city? Does your department plan on investing at all in tree canopy and anything like that? Like, what is the plan with that $1 million? Is that to handle canopy? Is that new trees? Is that some of the old growth trees? We help those out, and of course, I'm talking Savin Hill Park and Dorchester Park. So those 3 points, if we could just talk about those, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. So, Carl, if it's all right with you, I think I will talk about trees very briefly, and then perhaps you and Allison can talk about zero waste and then the coordination with the state around Moakley and Climate Ready Dorchester. Does that make sense? Great. So just very briefly on the trees, Councillor Baker, we couldn't be more excited about it. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the Parks Department's upcoming budget hearing. But just to be clear, that's an additional $1 million for planting in addition to the normal line item that we typically have, which is around $900,000 in the Parks Department. It's also, though, for care, and I think that's really critical to your point, Councillor, and this is something that you and I have talked about at length before, and in fact, you pointed out to me when I was an early Parks Commissioner, is that there's a lot more value in these older trees than we thought. And all of the recent studies in the past 5 years have just reinforced that viewpoint. It's really not about number of trees planted, it's about tree canopy. And so if it is about tree canopy, inherently larger trees are that much more valuable. So what we're really excited about in the Parks Department's budget is the $500,000 that's associated with the Urban Forestry Master Plan. And what that will do is not only develop a master plan that has equity built in as an intentional motivator for where we're going to continue planting in the city, to make sure that there's not these social inequities around air pollution that Councillor Flynn referenced, but also that we would have the ability to develop new rules, new regulations, a new ordinance to protect some of those old growth trees that you're talking about, because they're so valuable, not only from a stormwater management perspective, from a heat island perspective, from a air pollution perspective, but really just at a very basic carbon sequestration. They are sucking in a lot more carbon than some of these newer trees, so they do need to be protected. So that's what we're most excited about. Carl, whichever subject you want to take first on the other two.
Thank you, Chris. And I just would add to what the chief said that, as I mentioned before, we work very closely with the Parks Department. We are involved in the master planning effort to, again, coordinate it with all the other aspects of our approach to climate, carbon reduction and climate adaptation. In regard to recycling and composting, Councillor, I think as you know, the mayor released a zero waste plan over a year ago, and that was a joint effort of our cabinet and the streets cabinet. Cook and Chris Osgood co-chaired all the steering committee and the group we brought together to put that report together. And obviously recycling and composting are very important components of that. I believe you heard from Chief Osgood a few days ago that that the new measures, the new programs around encourage and increase food waste composting, and to increase recycling of textiles, where the city is hoping to launch later this year. Those efforts are being led by the Department of Public Works, but our team works very closely with them in putting those out. Also, the idea of owning our own infrastructure was one of the strategies that was discussed in the zero waste plan, not with a definitive conclusion, but it was something that the city definitely should be looking into, and that also is going to be led, an analysis of that idea is going to be led by the Public Works Department also, and I believe there is money allocated specifically in the budget so they can start to explore that idea in greater detail. I'd like to ask Allison Brizius, who is our Director of Climate and Environmental Planning and has direct responsibility for all the climate planning that we do, to talk about the coordination of the state.
Before we move on, Carl, are there any examples? Are there any municipalities or even states, for that matter, that have their own compost operations, like large scale, that could handle our population? Are there any examples of it around the country, around the world?
Councilor, I'm sure there are, but if you don't mind, I will submit that information to you later, because I'd like to make sure I identify them all correctly.
Thank you.
Allison?
Hi, thank you, councilors. Thanks for having us today. As you rightly identified, coordination with the state is a critical element in our work on climate resilience, particularly in areas of the coast where there is a large fraction of ownership that is state ownership of land, and then large amounts of public infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. So for those plans, particularly the climate resilience and coastal solution plans that are underway over the past few years and ongoing, for example, in the Dorchester area, there's close coordination with state agencies, both on understanding and mapping the risks, and then creating plans for how to intervene and increase adaptation of those coastal areas. So, for example, when we have our meetings, I'll wrap it up, but there's a number of regular meetings and elements of coordination that we do with the state, and we can give you more detailed writing after this.
Thank you, Allison. That's what I wanted to hear. I just want to make sure that all that coordination is going on. It's it's going to be very complex, but I think in 10 or 15 years, when we're actually done with the whole stretch, we'll have something to be really proud about. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Carl and Chris.
Yes, and if I could just add very briefly that the state has been an excellent partner with us since we've started our climate planning. They give us some large grants that helped finance the Climate Ready Boston Report in 2016, and this is just a continued collaboration that we have.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Thank you, Commissioner. Next up is Councillor O'Malley, the chair of our Environment Department Committee, and then we'll have Councillor Breeden and then Councillor Edwards. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, Carl, Alice, and David, thank you all for your exceptional work, particularly during these very difficult times. There's a lot to get through. I'm going to begin by answering Councillor Baker's question. There are a number of cities that have their own infrastructure. Some are private-public partnerships, but San Jose's got a really good model. Alameda, California, Denver, Boulder, LA, San Francisco. So I share your call and look forward to continuing the conversation both with Public Works and the environment. For the first round of questions, and I appreciate I got most of the responses last night on the questions that we posed at the working session, but I want to start by talking about using city funds or having the city acquire land to advance resiliency in our climate goals. And I had asked if there were any specific in the timeline and responses that an open mind, I think, is a great place to start. In reference to there was a Climate Ready open house in Dorchester where there was some discussion about doing this. I would just sort of add to that the opportunity in Roslindale at the Roslindale Wetlands, an area we all know well, a place I played as a kid, and it's been a great sanctuary for me to walk and run through during this pandemic. But this is another great opportunity for us to advance that goal. So just very, very briefly, because I want to get through a lot, Carl, if you can sort of talk about what the process would be looking at specific opportunities for acquisition. I'd also talked about this with the CPA funding hearing last week, if that could be perhaps another revenue stream going forward. But specifically, the question is, what would the process look like for the city to acquire land to advance our resiliency goals, similarly the way that we've acquired land for our housing goals or some other opportunities?
I'm not going to address sort of the administrative procedure because I'm not actually sure on that what that is, but I've been starting to look into it. I think more important is to think about how do we select and prioritize types of parcels that we might want to acquire. Our department is going to be working with the Parks Department, and I know Commissioner Woods is going to be appearing before you this afternoon, so we talk about it more in detail. But the Parks Department is going to be leading a sort of a parcel prioritization or a purchasing prioritization effort. So
you had it right the first time, Carl. Parcel prioritization.
Thank you, Chief. And so we want to address what are the parcels that might be appropriate for our park needs, our recreation needs, our climate needs, our stormwater management needs, all together in a comprehensive way, so that we can be sure we're spending the city's money effectively. Obviously, we hear a lot of proposals. I'm certainly aware of some of the parcels that neighbors are suggesting in the Roslindale Wetlands, and we're looking at them closely. We're also making sure that any properties that are subject to seizure for tax liens that are coming to the city, that we are identifying the appropriate ones to absorb into the wetlands also.
Right. No, that's helpful. So we'll continue those discussions going forward. Shifting gears slightly, is delighted to be with many of you last December as the mayor signed his executive order mandating that all new municipal buildings will be net zero carbon. Similarly, delighted with the efforts of your cabinet chief, and really want to give a shout out to John Dalzell from the BPDA on looking at the change in Article 37 zoning process, which would mandate carbon neutral building assessment. that has to be how we move forward. I've been, singing this hymn for quite some time. And I don't need to reiterate it other than to say that to save our climate, we really have to start with our buildings. So proud to have worked with you, Carl, 10 years ago or so, or close to it, on the Beardo legislation. This is obviously the next step. Talk very briefly about sort of compliance, and also if there would be any opportunity, I know the answer is no, how we get that to yes, to have a designated NZC manager for your department or for your cabinet chief to really help these new buildings coming down the pipeline comply with our requirements and indeed look to strengthen those requirements.
So, Councillor, first of all, thank you for all the, the great support, very strong support and leadership you've shown in the council, and passing Birdo and many other environmental, measures. And it's been great to work with you over this whole time. As I mentioned, the 3 staff positions that are included in the mayor's proposed budget, are all going to the climate and environment team. So there's but one is at the moment designated to focus on zero waste. One is designated to focus on the wetlands and the Conservation Commission, and then we're also getting a deputy director for the climate and environment team. And even though it is not specifically for the purpose that you have identified, I think that the added capacity we're getting to that team as a whole will enable us to be more effective in all the realms, including the one in dealing on buildings. We are actively, we've got a great team working under Allison around carbon neutrality, especially around buildings. And we are developing, initiatives, programs that will help us to move that work forward. Maybe Allison, you want to talk a little bit about developing the building performance standard and how the measures that we want to put in place to help buildings meet the requirements that we would be developing.
Sure. So briefly, one of the major actions identified in the 2019 update of the Climate Action Plan to move toward a carbon performance standard for large existing buildings. You identified the important contribution of new construction and new buildings to our emissions. Is what another action, the zoning, is dedicated towards. Existing buildings account for 85% of our 70 to 80% of our emissions. And so they're also a really critical component. So here we're looking at updates to the Birdo ordinance that could support setting reasonable but aggressive carbon targets that existing large buildings would need to achieve that would ramp down over time in consistency with achieving our carbon neutral goals as a city. So we're in the process. Sorry, Councillor, did you have a question?
Just briefly, because my time is up, so I guess I'll try to get this in. What was the compliance of new buildings that voluntarily participated with our request for Article 37's revamp?
So you're asking about the carbon neutral building assessment element? Yes, since that was implemented last year, every building going through Article 37 has either performed the process of performance. And we can give you a more specific number.
Right. Do you know offhand how many buildings that is?
So at least 20 have given us a report already, and they're in the pipeline.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And I'll get to David, Community Choice Energy, in the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Next up is Councillor Breeden, then Councillor Edwards. Councillor Breeden.
I'm going to put myself without the video just to see if I can maintain some level of stability in my net connection. Thank you so much for this great discussion, answering all of our questions. With regard to climate resiliency, I had a question about whether or not you're looking at the Alston area. It's on the floodplain of the Charles River. It's increasingly recognized as a problem with heat islands in the summer. And I just wanted to flag up, a low the coastal areas are extremely important to attend to. We also need to address climate readiness in inland. Then the other, I'm delighted to hear that there's more money going into urban forestry. Again, in Alston, with the so much new development, I'd like to see you work with the BPDA to see if we can, when a formerly industrial area is converted into residential, I'd like to see a more robust development of new green space around new development. We're adding a lot of density, but we're not adding a lot of green space in a neighborhood that has probably got the least amount of green space in the whole city. And let's see. Oh yes, along the pike on Lincoln Street, those areas that were formerly industrial are increasingly becoming residential, and there's a lot of problems with noise pollution and air pollution, and increased levels of asthma along that corridor. I'd like to see some initiatives around trying to build sound barriers that would also decrease the level of particulate matter that is leaking into the new residential and the residential neighbourhood along the pike there. So those are really the three issues that I have for right now. Also, there's one more: the protection of urban wilds. We've lost several in Alston Brighton in the last decade or so. I'm encouraged to hear that you're looking at possibly acquisition of parcels of land that we could build some more climate resiliency in the neighborhood. But, you know, I think that, again, trying to keep our tree canopy and create new green space is really important, not just for sports and recreation, but also passive green space. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I think I can address most of those with the exception, and I'll have to follow up with you on the specifics of the Lincoln Street area, if that's okay, Councillor. So moving forward, I'll have Carl speak to the next phase of climate ready work, which does have to focus more on some of the potentials of inland flooding from the rivers with the Neponsit and with the Charles, but we have already done a fairly robust analysis of that, if not the district analysis that we've done on the sea level rise. But what I do want to say about Lower Alston is that there's a big opportunity there. You know, it's called Lower Alston for a reason. There's a lot of ways for the water to drain. There's a current project proposed by Boston Water and Sewer that they're actually trying to partner with Harvard University to implement the, they call it the Dept project, which would provide a new sewer line that would prevent neighbors from, you know, almost 1,300 homes from potential of flooding. So we're very supportive of that project, and we can follow up with you on information regarding that. I will say your assessment of Alston is correct as far as canopy and as far as available green space. It's not the lowest in the city, but it does have pockets where it is very, very under tree canopy. And then in addition, even though 100% of our residents in the city of Boston live within a 10-minute walk of the park, there are still within that framework pockets of inequity built in. And one of those pockets is in the Alston. So again, as those institutional master plans develop, as the BPDA develops with the neighborhood in Alston, a priority of us will be expansion of green space in Alston, and in addition, and perhaps more importantly, the creation of contiguous green space so that people have safe green ways to get in and out of the neighborhood. Carl, is there anything you want to add on the climate ready aspect?
Yes. So Councillor, thank you for your question. So certainly we're looking closely at Alston, and you know, we have not neglected any of the neighborhoods in our climate ready planning work. In regard to flooding from the Charles River, we certainly recognize that with enough sea level rise, it is possible that the Charles River Dam is the water goes over the Charles River Dam, or the Charles River Dam gets bypassed, but frankly, it's farther down in terms of time, and it's much less of a priority in terms of our immediate planning. What we have been doing is we have been engaging with the state to think about the two aspects of the Charles River Dam. One, what do we do in the long term with the Charles River Dam so that water, it doesn't get overtopped in coastal storms with a lot of sea level rise? And the second thing is there enough capacity to pump out the Charles River Basin so that when there's very intense inland precipitation, that it can keep the water from rising up behind the dam. It is a state responsibility, but we're working very closely with them about how we do that. And you know, it would, but it's a little farther down the line than some of the other things we're looking at. And I think Chief Cook addressed our concerns about heat in Alston too, and how the canopy will help with that.
Thank you. You know, just the whole management of stormwater, the new drainage pipe that the Boston Water and Sewer is working on is a 7-foot outfall to the river. You know, it's great that it will provide drainage in that area, but I'm just concerned that, you know, just it's going to put a lot of extra pressure, and we need to do some small stuff like
Councillor Breeden, we just lost you.
I don't want to
working on managing our runoff with bioswales and rain gardens is another important aspect that we should be attending to as well. Thank you.
No, Councillor, you're right. And actually, if anything, the COVID crisis has actually accelerated Chief Osgood and I's coordination about enhancing the public realm with green infrastructure. It has to be a priority. And so we will continue that planning, and we will look at the neighborhoods most affected. And certainly, I mean, Lower Alston, as far as stormwater, is greatly affected.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief Cook. Thank you, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Edwards is up next, and then it'll be Councillor Wu and then Councillor Campbell. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Just wanted to first commend and thank the folks on the ConCom for their wonderful advocacy and meeting so far. I have to say it was, we just had a hearing in front of them, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about what their budget structure looks like. I do think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in terms of enforcing the wetlands ordinance, and I think that's a great thing. But I want to make sure that they had the money or the infrastructure that they needed to be able to enforce that, I think, historic and wonderful ordinance. I'm particularly wanting to make sure that they have, I don't know if it's an intake, what their intake looks like. Do they need technical outreach? How does it work? If I wanted to file something, can I file something saying ABC violates the wetlands ordinance? So do we have the budget and the infrastructure built in for the ConCom to be that kind of enforcement mechanism? You know, so that's the first question. If you could talk to the budget and how people reach out and how they're going to be an enforcer of the wetlands ordinance and what money you have to support that. I wanted to say I don't know if you had mentioned that the trees conversation should happen more with parks, or if it could happen now. What are you saying, Chairwoman Bach? It's more with parks?
I think it's more with parks. The chiefs alluded to it, but the details of it, we're going to do at parks.
All right, then I can save that then. If we can go to the municipal buildings then, I understand that in many cases we will not have school, or will be limited in some kind of capacity. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to actually get into those buildings, into schools especially, and figure out how we're going to make them as green, as retrofitting them as much as possible. So I wonder if there's an advanced or a prioritization for those buildings. Also, just looking at, you know, we've had a lot of conversations about procurement and making sure that we have diversity in our supply chain, and also who gets contracts from the city of Boston. One of the areas that I think is open for a lot of folks to get involved, but also for the city to also farm out this is changing or painting the roofs of our municipal buildings white. I believe that helps actually with this heat resistance and making them, I don't know, better at least. And so I'm wondering why can't we have a program that looks at small contractors similar to our senior saves program that, you know, contracts $10,000 or less, but get out there and start to retrofit. So, and then my last question, because I'm going to leave the trees in East Boston, is about utility bills. Why? Okay, so when this crisis is over with, does the city have any idea how it's going to help people with any form of utility bills for paying for electricity? Is there a green opportunity, something for folks who are going to owe a lot of money?
Okay. So, Counselor, I think I'm gonna, if it's all right with you, just in the issue of time, we can research the roof question you have for us. I know New York has had such a program for a long time, so we can research that and get back to you. Carl can speak to the Conservation Commission budget and the way that they're gonna intend to approach the wetlands ordinance, and Allison can certainly help with that. And then I think you may benefit from hearing from David Musselman about the intentionality we've had with getting into schools to do energy retrofits, because I think that's your question there, as well as the Community Choice Energy Program, which over long term, one of the goals is also to reduce residents' bills, electric bills, if that makes sense with you.
That's great.
Right. Starting with Carl.
Okay, so let me start with the Conservation Commission. So thank you, Councillor, for the questions and for your support of the new wetlands ordinance too. So the mayor's budget would add a staff position, an environmental project manager, to join the ConCom team, which currently consists of 2 people, and we'll raise it to 3. So in the immediate term, to support the development of the regulations that we need to put in place so that we can implement the provisions of the new wetlands ordinance, and then in the longer term, to help with both the review of applications that come into the Conservation Commission to make sure that they are adhering to the requirements, and to help with the sort of enforcement measures that you described. Any resident of Boston can submit that information to the Conservation Commission staff that they believe that there's a violation of the ordinance and its regulations. Frankly speaking, most of the work that we're doing, there's a major piece of enforcing the ordinance will be in the initial planning and the initial construction of the facility. So that is its focus, but we do get information that people have taken action or changed their site or their building in a way that makes it non-conforming, and we do take enforcement action now, and we are getting more resources to increase our capacity to deal with that.
Okay.
David?
Sure. Thank you for letting me come today. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to address the schools question first, and then talk a little bit about community choice electricity. So as you know, we are about to complete the first phase of Renew Boston Trust, which was a pilot phase. We spent about $10 million going through 14 buildings and doing some very significant retrofits. We're getting ready to launch a second phase, and we've selected the buildings for a third phase, which include 6 schools for what we're calling deep dives, which are fairly comprehensive review. We've selected another approximately 10 schools to do lighter touches, which will include improving lighting, water conservation, building envelope work, but probably not quite as deep a dive on the infrastructure. And then in addition to that, we're looking at approximately 30 buildings, including I think about 25 schools, for installing solar panels on the roofs or on parking lot canopies. These are roofs that were identified as newer roofs because you don't want to put solar panels on roofs that are due to be replaced. And so we are targeting this 30. We're hoping to start the auditing work on that over the next month or two, and would be expecting to actually start the full design work early next year, and the construction work would probably start in the last quarter of this fiscal year or the first quarter of the following year. But we're trying to catch next summer's construction. But there is a fair amount of planning that has to go in, which makes it hard to sort of mobilize to take advantage of the fact that people aren't in buildings now. But we are definitely moving to schools. On the utility, I'm sensitive to the time, but I'll just have a short answer on utility bills.
Thank you.
As you know, we are in the process of trying to get our municipal aggregation program, or what we're calling community choice electricity, up and running. And one of the principles that we've established is to try and provide utility bill stability and to reflect what we know is that a significant number of Boston residents are energy burdened, and we are trying to come up with strategies for providing a lower cost electricity. It may not solve the problem that's arising right now, but we are trying to address it for the longer term.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Wu, and then it'll be Councillor Campbell, and then Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I had a question on the municipal carbon footprint. So wondering what the update is. I know we've talked previously about, Renew Boston Trust, et cetera, but also wondering about our energy procurement for city buildings and whether that is, any decisions on moving to solar, renewable energy credits or solar panels, or just looking at city buildings in particular. And then also on the urban forestry master plan, which I know is going to be later today, but I'm just hoping I could get quick answers on whether that is focused just on city-owned trees or how non-city-owned trees on private property fits into that, and what the process will be like of community engagement.
Thank you, Councillor. I can briefly touch on the urban forestry master plan. David is probably best suited to talk about the city's utility use. Very quickly, the reason it's such a robust budget for the urban forestry master plan is that we are going to have a robust public process, and hopefully we can have the same kind of public process that we're all accustomed to Parks Department having around its capital work, in-person meetings, surveys, neighborhood group meetings. We hope not to be completely limited to Zoom meetings and other outreach efforts that were in the COVID crisis, but we also can't, we need to accelerate the work. To your second question, it's critical that the urban forestry master plan concentrates not only on trees that are in the public way or in the public domain. It's critical that it focuses on trees on privately owned property. To Councillor Baker's earlier questions, it's often those properties that actually have these older trees with large canopy. So it's very, very important that we concentrate on them and come up with a preservation strategy or a carbon replacement strategy when possible.
Let me start the second question. So, Councillor, thank you. The cities from municipal operations, our carbon emissions are down over 40%. since 2005, so we've already made significant progress. Currently, in terms of buying renewable energy or buying renewable electricity, we buy RECs that account for about roughly a third of our electricity procurement. And in addition to the increase in PV installations on city buildings, and we've got a couple more coming up that David will talk about, we are having a big focus through the Renew Boston Trust on reducing our energy consumption overall. At the moment, we think that is the most effective and most far-reaching thing that we can do. David, do you want to talk a little bit about our PV installations?
Sure. We've completed 2 this year, well, in the past year, on community centers, and we are working on one that will go in this summer at Boston Police Headquarters in their parking lot. And we're buying the power then under a power purchase agreement, but that is adding the amount of green capacity within the city. For phase 3 of Renew Boston Trust, we're looking to add up to about 30 additional rooftop or parking lot structures, which is a pretty substantial move up. That would be, if we got them all in, it would be about 10% of city-owned buildings. In addition, we are working on efficiency through the existing Renew Boston Trust, which we're now ramping up for phases 2 and 3. But we're also getting ready to launch a Renew Boston Trust for exterior lighting, and we have funding requested in this budget, which would allow us to do the conversion of exterior lighting from, we still have about 20% of our street lights are traditional mercury vapor, sodium vapor lamps, to move those to LED, which would be significant savings on about 20% of electricity used for exterior lighting. And we're going to assess all the rest of them to try and determine where we can use controls to better manage how the lights are used. We've seen Cambridge do this and receive about another 15 or 20% reduction in their electric use through the use of controls.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Wu. Next up is Councillor Campbell, and then it'll be Councillor Asabi George, and then Council President Janey. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and I'll be sort of quick, just because I know colleagues submitted a lot of questions. But thank you, Commissioner Cook, and thank you, Carl and David. And I also want to give a shout out to David Corby, who's been doing some great work too, and just many of the team members. Allison, thank you as well. I guess I just have 2 questions, and this connects to. First of all, I have to give a shout out to Councillor O'Malley too. I think he's brought these conversations up over the years with respect to how do we meaningfully engage certain communities that often don't see themselves reflected in the conversation around climate change, or are not meaningfully connected to our climate-ready goals and strategies. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more around, just what's our sort of approach? How has the department shifted to get in front of these communities more, to pull them in and to say it absolutely affects you and it's relevant to what's going on? And I appreciate the department's intentionality around equity. So that's one question, just what their approach looks like now. And then obviously with the impact of COVID-19, and particularly on communities of color in Dorchester, Mattapan, my biggest neighborhoods, how do we think about environmental resiliency and sort of public health together, and what are specific things the department is sort of doing? I mean, Commissioner Cook, we've done trees, gone in Franklin Field to plant more trees. We've done some really creative things on the ground. Just curious, what are some other solutions that are readily available that don't cost a lot of money? Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
It's a great question. I could briefly touch on the last part, and then I think it might be beneficial to hear from Allison and Carl regarding the Green Abate Leaders Program. And I just want to echo David Corby is doing some amazing work around that intentionality with socially vulnerable populations and really making equity at the core of climate action. So just on COVID, it's the populations that have been most affected by COVID are likely to be the same populations that, if unabated, are going to be most affected by the climate crisis. And so there has to be an intentionality, which there is, behind the Environment Department's work and the Boston Public Health Commission's work around things like air pollution, heat island effect, stormwater management, and sea level rise. I will say in that hierarchy, the one that's a real threat today is heat island effect and all the problems that it exacerbates around respiratory diseases. And you just have to look at asthma rates among socially vulnerable populations. So trees is a part of that. But actually, as we start to look at pandemic response, we do also have to look at the public realm and see how much more enhanced the public realm can work for us. We can no longer look at parks as just recreational facilities, and we can no longer look at streets as just things that get you from A to B. We have to look at them as part of the public health infrastructure, which means green infrastructure in the roads, and it means very, very productive vegetation for our communities. So those are just some of the ways that we're looking around that. Carl and Alice, I don't know if you want to talk about the outreach and the Green Abate programs.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. So there are two aspects of our outreach, sort of two forms that our outreach takes to communities across Boston. One is, we've already mentioned the Climate Leaders, Green Abate Leaders program, which David Corby has been leading. In what we have developed is a program where we go out to members of the community and say, you are the ones who know your community best. We go out to leaders in the community and say, you are the ones who know their communities best. You have the best network. You can be the best messengers. You can, and we train them in the basics of climate and climate action and what the city is doing. And we say, and what we ask of them in return, say, take this information at a very general level, customize it for your community, for your network, and bring them information about climate so they become generally aware of the climate issues, that they learn the actions they can take, both in terms of getting involvement, with the development of city policies and programs, and in taking direct climate action. And we also ask the climate leaders to bring back to us anything they've learned so we can incorporate that into the work that we do. And then the outreach that we do with specific projects. And Allison, why don't you talk about the outreach we've been doing, say, with some of the Climate Ready Boston work, and with the building performance standard too.
Sure, thank you, everyone. So I'll start with our climate resilience work, and I want to give a thank you to Peyton, Skylar Jones, and Lee Davis that lead a lot of this work and do the hard work. There's a number of levels at which we engage in outreach for those plans. This is a series of community open houses that have education and then feedback elements to understand the vulnerabilities and then weigh in on priorities and the values of the communities so that they can inform or customize neighborhood-specific solutions for coastal resilience in those areas. Because not everyone can attend open houses, we go out and attend community meetings and neighborhood association meetings and attempt to build partnerships with local organizations to better disseminate information and bring that connection and feedback stronger into the planning process. Finally, we also have surveys and resources available online that people can give feedback and learn more about the efforts. An example from the performance standards, so the carbon emissions reduction work, setting a performance standard for large existing buildings. This is a process by which we're working with local groups and a consultant team to co-create the engagement process, to use them, community groups, as we know that resources and have unique expertise in the area that we don't necessarily think the impact and the needs of the community. So we're working with those groups to develop what is the appropriate, particularly in light of the COVID and the new concerns with how to do appropriate outreach online. So happy to give you more information about that process offline as it develops.
Thank you, guys, and I appreciate the co-creation language, which is critical. So thank you all for your hard work. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Councillor Bach.
Thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Asabi-George up next, and then it'll be Council President Janey, and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Asabi-George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here today, Chief and directors and company. Many of the questions that my colleagues have are very thoughtful and very in-depth and very good, so I thank them for that. My question is really related to Councillor Edwards' line of question. I've called for a hearing order requesting information basically on the relationship between Build BPS and the Environment Department, and for me, that's a very specific thing that I'm interested in. How do we make sure when we rebuild or do any significant renovations to our school buildings that we're being very thoughtful about not just energy efficiency, but climate resiliency. So I'm interested in that, but sort of more broadly, I'm interested in the work that your department does with other departments across our city, because it's really important that as we talk about efficiencies and transportation, that we're thinking more broadly and more deeply about resiliency. And I imagine as our city's experts, which all of you are, that you are intimately involved in the work that each of our departments are doing. So if you could perhaps speak about the Build BPS a little bit further, in addition to what Councillor Edwards had asked about, and then sort of your relationship with our city's departments across the board, again, as you are our in-house experts in this field. Thank you, Chief, and thank you, everyone, for the work that you continue to do.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll touch briefly on BPS, and then if David wants to add anything more about the Renew Boston Trust work with BPS in addition to what he already spoke to. And then I think it'd probably benefit us to hear from Carl, but you're right. The Environment Department is a resource for all the other city departments, and Carl can talk about those relationships, but explicit relationships exist in addition to informal relationships. An example of that is the Smart Utilities Plan. The Smart Utilities Planning, which I'll let Carl speak to. But just very briefly on BPS, we're very intentional about our work at BPS. We have a rule within the cabinet that when an email comes from a student or from a teacher or from a parent at BPS, all work stops and we address that work. It is critical that we give everything we can to BPS to make sure that they're successful, not only that they're having a healthy environment, but they're also in the best possible clean environment for learning. And so it is really a goal of ours to assist Build BPS in making those schools as environmentally and ecologically friendly, not only from a stormwater perspective. So
Chief, if I could just interrupt very quickly on that. I hope also that you're inserting yourselves in classroom activities, because again, as the in-house experts, when we think about any of our science or environment classes, our AP environment program that we have across a number of our high schools, you too should be in those classrooms and responding to those requests. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's an excellent point, and the superintendent and myself were on track in reviewing the possibilities for interaction in curriculum and instructional practices, and I know that's a priority of BSAC, so we will make sure to continue to prioritize that work. But as far as Build BPS, we're sure that we are coordinated between Renew Boston Trust and Build BPS, not only just for the benefit of making sure that kids are in the best possible buildings, but also so that we don't waste city money, right? So we don't want to do energy retrofits in a building that's going to be completely redesigned. David, I think you already spoke to Renew Boston Trust and BPS, but you can talk more if you want, or Carl, you can go into the interconnected with other departments.
Sure. So obviously the for major projects we have the mayor's executive order on zero net carbon buildings, which certainly would apply to anything new. And so this is a standard for all major projects in BPS and other municipal facilities also. We work very hard to establish, very thorough and broad communications and lines of cooperation and coordination with departments across City Hall and related agencies, Councillor, for just the reason that you mentioned, that the goals are broad and they require the work of all the departments. And you can see there are of that, from the zero waste plan, Chief Cook and Chief Osgood led together, the Go Boston 2030 plan, which thoroughly embraces the climate goals that we had, and Imagine Boston 2030 references the climate goals and the climate plans that we had in place for the cities, the citywide planning that's going on. So we work on it in various ways. In terms of specific projects, we are always available to our colleagues in other departments. The budget department is in its guidelines for proposals for new capital projects is asking all departments to make sure that new capital projects are in line with the city's climate plans, as well as with other plans that we have, of course, too. So we are very happy. We enjoy collaborating with our colleagues in other departments, and with the mayor's leadership, this is absolutely happening. And the work that Chief Cook does with his colleagues in the cabinet just makes that easier. I think that basically covers the question, and is there something else?
Great. One other thing, and my time is running tight, so perhaps you can answer it either in the next round. But my question is, thinking about transportation, for example, we had a conversation in our budget hearing with them, and we've talked a lot about Uber and Lyfts and other ride shares coming into the city and the impact that those added cars have on our environment. And I wonder if, if there's opportunities to involve yourself in those conversations, because it certainly plays a role in our efforts. But my time is up. I'll sort of leave that question to simmer a little bit and get to it in the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Carl.
Excuse me, Councilor, I could just answer that very quickly. This work is led by the Transportation Department. We are absolutely part of those conversations.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. And Commissioner Spector, I took the liberty of turning your video off temporarily just because you were breaking up badly on audio. So feel free to try turning it back on, but I just wanted to say to people, we're having a lot of connectivity issues today. If you find that you're having problems when I'm just turning off the video, prioritizes the audio so we can at least have a smooth experience on that front. All right, next up is Council President Janey from District 7, and then it'll be Councillor Julia Mejia. Councillor Janey.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. I know we've been having challenges. I want to begin by thanking Chief Cook. I want to thank you. I want to thank your entire team. It's been just a joy to work with you in my first term. I have a lot of concerns about how the environment is impacting poor communities of color. I see this as an environmental justice issue. Building on some of the remarks from Councillor Flynn earlier, I have very high rates of asthma in my district. And so I have a few questions. I think I'd like to just start with the impact of COVID. And I heard your response to Councillor Campbell's question here, but I think my question is a little different. Maybe it was covered earlier, in that how I think about all the ways that COVID-19 has impacted, us in the city of Boston. And one of the impacts was how it changed human behavior at a large scale all across the world. And as a result, it's led to the reduction in air pollution and a whole host of other things. And I wonder how we sustain those gains as we move toward reopening. So that's one question.
Yeah, so it's going to be a challenge, Councillor, and I'll tell you why. There's been, because everyone, not everyone, people who have the ability or the privilege to stay home have been able to stay home. That has led to a huge reduction in emissions globally and definitely in the United States as well. Our concern is that people will not trust public transit systems and will not feel safe on public transit systems when it comes time to return. And that will actually lead to more single-use car use, which could actually drive our transportation emissions up. And so one thing that we have to be very aggressive about is working with the MBTA to make sure not only is it safe for commuters to take the MBTA, but also that we have people prioritize that. And if there is flexibility for people to work from home, that they should exercise that flexibility to sort of reduce those transportation emissions. So that's just one example of the concern we have.
I would agree, and I would suggest, I'm sorry to cut you off, Chief, I have a number of questions. I would agree with that concern around whether or not people feel confident in the T. We had a great hearing just the other night, and certainly, and I'm sure you're aware, I think just important to have the departments connect to talk about this, because whatever ways we can encourage, and not just your what you oversee in transportation, but obviously thinking of public health and the Office of Economic Development, because all of it is interconnected, because it would be important to try to sustain some of the gains. Now, obviously, as people start using cars, as more buses and trains, and we're going to see numbers go up again in terms of the bad numbers that we don't want to see go up. But I would be interested in how we can proactively sustain some of those gains that we saw in terms of the reductions, because those were important and they certainly impact the residents in my district. And just continuing on that theme of an environmental justice, and I'd be interested in how, I think of the high asthma rates in District 7, I think of the heat islands, obviously interested in how this budget moving forward is going to address that using an equity lens. And then I would also add to that, thinking about recycling, which I think is a challenge in my district. I have a very dense district, lots of renters in my district, less geographic space. It's especially true in the South End. Where do we put these big blue bins? Certainly true in Roxbury as well as the Fenway. And so I'd love to see these numbers go up. I'd love to partner with folks on how we might get these numbers up. So I'd be interested in your thoughts and ideas and how this budget will speak to that. I always am interested in the spend, and my understanding, I think, is that you guys for FY20, I think there was for contracted services, 853,000 and some change there. I'm interested in how much of that went to businesses owned by people of color, women-owned businesses, and locally owned businesses. And then how we might improve for FY21, which is the budget that we are discussing now. And why don't I pause, and if I have another question, I can try to follow up in the next round if we don't have time in this round. Thank you, Chief.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. With the exception of the heat island in your district, I'll defer the rest of the questions to the Commissioner and his team. But there has to be equity baked into the urban forestry master plan and baked into the rest of our climate ready work. And we got to build on our successes, but we have to do more work. That's what COVID-19 has showed us. And so we have to be very intentional. Budgeting isn't about what you spend money on, it's about who you spend money on. And you have to spend money on our most socially vulnerable populations. Commissioner?
Yep, and Commissioner, as you go on, my other question really, I may not have a need for a second round, is how we engage poor communities of color in this work. They are often the most impacted by these decisions that we're talking about, and obviously our city council hearings are a way for them to engage, but I'd be interested in any thoughts the department has and how we engage as you respond. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So on that last, I'm not sure whether you were on the, we're in the hearing when we discussed it, the climate leaders and climate ambassadors program. We are.
And I may have missed it, and so please don't feel that you need to repeat it. I will make sure to be.
Yeah, but very briefly, those are specifically designed to, they are open to all residents of Boston and participants from outside Boston, but we very much target, populations and neighborhoods in Boston that may be, historically less involved or less represented in some of the processes that you discussed, to give them to make sure that we are reaching out very specifically about information about climate, how they can take action, and how they can be involved in the development of policy and programs. And we also design our individual projects and the outreach associated with them to make sure that we are really reaching out into the community to get the people affected by those projects. But we very much appreciate the attention and the support you give to those efforts. In regard to our contracting, frankly, we do not currently have any, certified. I'm not going to get the acronym right. Please excuse me. The MWS certified. Please excuse me if I butchered that acronym, which I'm sure I did. But we are very much looking out. We are not a big contracting department, but we are trying to increase that. We certainly get a lot of teams in regard to some of our research and planning projects, and we specifically do encourage people when they're putting together teams at the city's database of contractors from various communities to see whether it's possible to incorporate those types of businesses in the groups that come to us, and we are seeing more of that, but we could probably do more.
And Councillor, I'm happy to talk more on climate adaptation efforts regarding your questioning in the Parks Department budget later on.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Council President Janey. Next up, Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be my questions. Councillor Mejia.
Yes, good morning. I'm not sure if you can hear or see me. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties. I just want to confirm that you can hear and see me.
Can hear you and see you, but it's glitching a little bit on the seeing front. But.
So I'll just, you will not see me. You'll just hear me. How about that? Just to ensure that there's no confusion here. So I just want to first off say thank you so much to Chief Cook and your entire team for all the amazing work that you're doing. As someone who is still understanding the world of climate justice, and as someone who has survived a lot of the effects of it, I have asthma. My daughter has asthma. I grew up in Dorchester at a time, I don't know if you probably weren't even born then, but the Hurricane David or George, one of those hurricanes, I don't remember which one it was, but I just do remember that we were able to swim on our street because it got so flooded. And so I think about that happened so long ago. And then the house that I bought is in Dorchester, the street that I live on, it's a side street and often it gets flooded too. I know a lot of the energy that we focus on are some of the bigger streets like Morrissey Boulevard, Franklin Park area, those get flooded, but I know these little side streets do too. So I'm just curious about what type of infrastructure, or if there's a dashboard or some place where we can look at to see the side streets that are trending in terms of flooding, and then what type of communication and outreach is being done to those neighbors, those neighborhoods, about how to protect themselves, how to deal with the flooding. I'm just curious about that. I know and I appreciate all of the questions that you've gotten from my colleagues in regards to just communication to low-income communities, specifically those who don't really recognize the connection between the disparities that they face in terms of health and how it relates to transportation and equity and how all of these things are interconnected. But I'm just curious, aside from just the outreach, I'm really thinking about the cultural competency of that outreach, making sure that it's language that people, that it's easily accessible. Just wondering what type of feedback and direction are you getting and who are you getting it from when you're thinking about your messaging in terms of engaging communities of color. I'm just curious if there's even an opportunity to hire or contract, marketing firms that are led by women or people of color to kind of help with your thinking around some of that outreach. And then in regard to just kind of the outreach, I just feel like oftentimes a lot of it is based on what communities of color can do to be engaged. I'm just curious as to whether or not there's been opportunities to engage the people who are driving these issues in our community, like corporate folks. Like, how are we educating and engaging them in these processes, and what opportunities, if any, exist to have a roundtable discussion with all stakeholders, that everybody's accountable and engage in these dialogues. And then the last question is around these trees and property owners. I'm just curious about, because I know a lot of folks have trees where there's the branch fall out, people can get hurt. So how do we reconcile the need to keep these trees alive and well, and juxtapose that with the safety about some of these branches? Like, if you could just share some thoughts around that. And that's all for now. Thank you.
Happy to, Councillor. I'll start very briefly with the tree issue, and then I think Carl and Allison can speak to some of the other questions you had. And I would like them to highlight the climate-ready planning tool that I think is an important tool for different neighborhoods to look at their particular vulnerabilities. Just very quickly on trees, what's little known fact is you can actually cut the tree branches to your own property line. And so if there's a branch or if there's a limb that people are worried about that spreads out into the public way, the Parks Department can address those branches, can address those limbs, as can private property owners when it comes onto the property. A lot of people assume that just because the tree originates on somebody else's property, they can't take measures to address dangerous limbs. The second part of that question, though, is we have to remember that trees are living things. And just like the people in our house that we have conflicts with living things. We live in conflict with trees. And just like the people in our house, hopefully there's more benefits to living with those trees than disadvantages. And certainly in my experience, there's a lot of benefits to trees, and we do have to proactively protect trees. I will say that part of the problems that we see with branches falling down, creating dangerous conditions and big storms, is the lack of care that we give to trees. With proper pruning, trees can be very healthy, and they can actually lead to an environment where there's less of those concerns and less conflicts. And then in the public realm, we really need to give the space that trees are due. And so how do we work with the Public Works Department? That's something that Chief Osgood and I are in a constant dialogue about. How do we make room for trees so that the root systems don't uproot sidewalk and pavement and create ADA issues? Carl?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. So Councilor, we've referred a few times to the Climate Leaders and Climate Ambassadors program. And the reason that we established these programs is just to address that issue of cultural competence that you discussed. So we are getting leaders and ambassadors from those communities, and we are talking with them, and they have stepped forward as volunteers to take back all our various messages around climate to their own community, to their own networks, and put it in a language and a framework that they feel, that they think is the most effective for their networks and their communities. And it's been a very successful program. We've in not just English, but at least a couple other languages. I'm not sure we've gotten to the top 6, but we're working on it, and translating the materials we've had and getting as I said, leaders and ambassadors from those communities to help us connect effectively, with those communities, where they can be involved and that they can take action. We have lots of tools on our website, and which we certainly tell to those leaders and ambassadors that enable people to look into their own risks in more detail. We've mapped where we expect flooding to occur in the next 50 years, both from coastal storms and from increased precipitation, and where we expect heat to increase also. So all that information is available on the website, and we've worked with we were a partner to the I believe it was Science last summer, had a bunch of citizen scientists where they mapped where it was getting hot. On the order of 100 people from different neighborhoods around Boston and the Boston area, going around with basically thermometers, but something a little bit more sophisticated in terms of equipment to actually map where heat was happening now. So there's lots of that information available, and we are eager to get it out in a way that is most useful to all members of the community. The final thing is that we work very hard to engage all levels of the community, of the Boston community in a broad sense. We work very closely with a group called the Green Ribbon Commission, which came together 10 years ago after the first update of the Climate Action Plan to support the city's implementation of its plan. And that it now includes 35 leaders from major Boston businesses, institutions, universities, and hospitals, who are making their own commitments to action in their own institutions, and to help us increase the number of people who are involved in climate action. The latest edition last year, the Green Ribbon Commission worked together with our arts office, and obviously, and with the Environment Department, created Cultural Institute Working Group, which includes large and small institutions of art, of music, of entertainment, of sports around Boston to work together, both in changes in their own operation, in those institutions, and in serving as modes of education, because thousands and thousands more people go to those venues than probably come to the city's website or the Environment Department's website, as popular as that may happen. So we are engaged comprehensively to communicate with everyone and to get everything together. And I think that we can say we are very, very buoyed and enthusiastic about the response that we have gotten from all sectors of society in Boston around climate action.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. All right, we will jump now to my questions, and then we'll do a second round. Councillor Mejia, sorry if you're talking, I can't, you're breaking up, but we'll do a second round. There's gonna be another chance. But I will just say before I ask my questions that if councillors for their second round questions can just kind of have them ready and be able to be succinct so that we can give folks the time to answer them. Because I'm mindful we have a landmarks hearing right after this one, which is pretty transparently going to start a little late, but I don't want it to be way too late. So start the timer on myself. Chief Cook, it's amazing that we've gotten through this many questions and no one has remarked on the fact that you have robbed the MFA during the COVID crisis. It's good to see Paul Revere there behind you.
They're reproductions, Polaroid reproductions.
No, they're excellent.
No, because the MFA is in my district.
Yeah. All kinds of mischief we can get up to in these times. All right, anyways, I asked this in my written questions,
but I really wanted to underline it. The guidelines for the coastal flood resiliency zoning. I mean, I think it's an exciting set of guidelines. My office was excited to kind of see the presentation. I think it was last week. My concern is that often good guidelines that we construct, and especially ones like this that have been constructed with the know-how of the Environment Department, can kind of languish in this nether zone before they actually become zoning guidelines. Not zoning guidelines, zoning, right? Like before they actually get codified. And I know that your response was, hey, land on that point with the BPDA, but it seems to me like the expertise sits in this department, and I wouldn't want, as this gets moved over into the other department, for kind of some of it to get watered down. So if you could just speak to what the timeline and the plan collaboration on that is.
Yeah, I'll be very brief on it. I mean, obviously, we would defer to the BPDA on exact timeline, but in our point of view, they have been very well received. I will say, this was prior to pandemic, and so we are losing a little bit of the generation that those guidelines would help us review and provide feedback for them to move it to zoning. But generally, I would say that the Environment Department would be very excited about those moving into zoning as quickly as possible, as quickly as the BPDA deems it's appropriate. Allison and Carl, is there anything you want to add?
I would just to emphasize that we work very closely with our colleagues in the BPDA. The two people leading this work in the BPDA are former environment staff people, so we know them well, and they have a great deal of expertise that makes a huge contribution to the work that we do together, and we are eager to move it forward just as much as you are.
Yeah.
Great. And I guess my other related question, also related to zoning, is sort of again, the process might sit with the BPDA, but the idea generation, I feel like, sits with environment around moving to carbon neutral zoning, around kind of thinking about ways that we might discourage or even prevent the creation of new fossil fuel infrastructure in the city. And I would just like to hear where the conversations are about that, because I know obviously Brookline sort of jumped ahead of us on that, but I haven't seen anything concrete yet on our side.
Sure, happy to defer my time to Allison and Carl.
Allison, would you like to address that?
Sure. So thank you for the question. And absolutely, it was identified. The zoning was identified, as I mentioned earlier, as a major action in our 2019 update of the Climate Action Plan. And it's an action that we'll be closely collaborating with EPA on. I defer the details of that timing to them, obviously. I understand that they're thinking very carefully about the stakeholder engagement at the time, as we all are. But a lot of initial good work has been done on the technical side to understand the balance of energy efficiency and renewable energy in that area. The process is moving forward.
But based on that, I will say, Councillor, even within that context, through our existing Article 80, the Environment Department's review as well, we're still staunch advocates to the best of any proponent's ability to reduce fossil fuel infrastructure in new buildings.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I think that to some extent, I guess one of my anxieties is that as we think about our climate action plan and we think about, that we measure everything relative to where we're trying to go. And so it's good to measure goals like, oh, we made a list of goals and where are we on those goals? But like the real question is like, where are we on hitting the targets, right? Just seems like we can't be building new buildings and adding a bunch of fossil fuel infrastructure and expecting that we will get there from here. To that point, I wanted to ask again, you said you answered in the hearing. I'm curious about sort of that 10% of our capital budget that we're right now sending towards resiliency related things, how we think about that and how we prioritize that. And I ask that because we all know within the cap of resiliency, there's kind of there's the mitigation piece, which we've talked about a lot today. And then there's also kind of emission reduction pieces. And I mean, I could imagine us spending all of that 10% in one or the other of those directions.
That's right.
And so I'm curious about kind of how you think about, how much is this spending going to help us reach our climate goals versus how much is it going to help us handle this situation? And then also, I mean, 10% is a great number, but does that need to be more? And is it 10% of the new capital projects programmed, or is it achieving 10% of the overall capital plan? So
it's a good question, and we do have a formal write-up from OBM that we can share with you that then we can share out publicly. But in general, I can give you the basic principles of it, and I have to give all the credit in the world to the budget director, Justin Starrett, as well as our CFO, Emma Handy. They realized that our climate adaptation projects in particular, we're starting to have some massive numbers associated with them, right? And in addition to what Allison and Carl said, that we work with these individual departments, as Councillor Sabi-George referenced, Boston Public Schools, to make every single capital project in the city more resilient. That's before you even get to the net zero target goals, that there were going to be projects that we had the opportunity, but for a subset of funding, they would be able to achieve climate resiliency goals. And so the intentionality around this 10%, the 10% target of overall capital spending, and that's what it is. It's the upcoming budget, 10% of the overall capital spending, but also around this climate resiliency fund that has been proposed, is to create a dollar amount that departments could tap into to make their projects that much more resilient in collaboration, in coordination with the budget department and with the environment department. I hope that answers your question.
yeah, no, that's helpful. And I'm about to get the chime myself, so we will leave my questions there for a minute and jump back to the top of the order. So, but thank you for that, Chief. I think, you know, it's...
And we'll provide the write-up for you as well.
Yeah, it would be great to get that. It would be great. I think a pattern is emerging of my questions. Across these hearings, I feel like the only counter-cyclical thing that the city can really do is capital spending in the next few years. And I think that we just have to think so much about how we effectively use that capital spend on the big picture targets we've got. And also there's a whole employment aspect of that too. But I will leave my questions there and go back to the top. So Councillor Flynn, and then it'll be Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Flynn, any second round questions? Councillor Flynn, you there? All right. I don't see him at the moment, so I'm going to jump. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess it's better, Chief Cook, to be accused of stealing from the MFA than it is to be accused of stealing from the Gardner Museum. So well done. Appreciate your style. Just wanted to circle back a little bit to the questions about buildings, because I think it is so important. You know, Carl, you had talked about the 3 new positions, zero waste, wetlands, sort of ConCom, as well as a deputy director who serve under you. Given the enormity of buildings and the fact that I think we're making some really ambitious goals towards building net zero carbon, retrofitting net zero carbon, you know, DND had a great report out earlier this year that talks about the cost savings associated with, which seems to be the biggest myth, that it costs more to build green, when in fact it doesn't, and it can save real money over the long term. So I guess I wonder if we're not focusing enough on sort of buildings and having a dedicated position in that, and perhaps the deputy director, the new deputy director position, could be sort of the point person to help not only focus on this important issue, but also act as a liaison with the various city departments, be it BPS, DND, you know, so do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so the new deputy director absolutely will help us elevate those efforts, and I absolutely agree with you about their importance. In terms of working with other department, Allison here is already doing an absolutely fantastic job in working and getting things done with DND, with schools and other departments too. So I appreciate the focus that you have on it, and the encouragement to get more resources there. I think that what we are getting is a real boost to those efforts.
Okay. And listen, I will sing Allison's praises for till the cows come home, to mix metaphors a little bit. But the enormity of what we're trying to do here as it relates to buildings, I just want to make sure the bandwidth is there. I think, and this is no disrespect towards anyone on this panel, anyone in your department, I think sometimes we set ambitious goals as a city, and I just want to make sure that we have the bandwidth to follow up on those goals because it is so important. And as it relates to buildings, that's going to be my focus even more so this year as it relates to the environment, the trash and recycling. Those are sort of the two largest focuses I'm going to spend my time on this legislative session. So I would just, I look forward to working with the new deputy director and would just urge you to give that person sort of the focus on buildings. And to that point, this may be more for you, Chief Cook, as it relates to the, and I should have asked this in the CPA hearing, but I think it's relevant today. When we allocate CPA funding for new buildings to help support affordable housing, for example, does the city's mandate that it be zero carbon because it's used with city funds apply?
Not to my knowledge, Councillor, but I'll follow up with you.
Excuse me. Okay, so actually, so we have worked, and again, Allison in particular has worked very hard with our colleagues in D&D to raise the standards for new affordable housing. Allison, you want to talk a little bit about where that effort stands?
Sure. So this is really the good work of our colleagues in the Department of Neighborhood Development. Councillor O'Malley, you mentioned the report that they were able to release earlier in the year. That was an assessment of how to build net zero affordable housing in a number of the most common typologies that DND sees in their portfolio, and the introduction of a portfolio-wide approach to this construction so that they could balance the need for density and the importance of density in this area with energy efficiency and net zero standards. And as you said, they had some wonderful results. That was the first step in, as I understand it, in updating and upgrading their requirements. So first is that come the guidelines and peer review and community review of those guidelines. And then the intention is to update the standards so that they're met for city-funded affordable housing. And then there will be obviously more work and collaboration that's ongoing and understanding how that moves into the retrofit space that was identified as a critical area.
Terrific. And celebrate the report. I think we all do. I think everyone on this call does, and likely those watching do. And clearly, with new city affordable housing, they would be under the executive order as it relates to NZC or NZC ready. I don't believe that is the case with CPA projects because it's not a fully funded city project. It's usually $1 million or so geared towards it. There are two in my district that just secured funding in the last round. So I guess that would be something that I'd like us to work on going forward to be able to extend the ambitious but imminently achievable guidelines that we're imposing on new city buildings to also include buildings that receive some city funds, such as the CPA. And I think there'd be some great opportunity to do so, and certainly leadership with you, Allison, and your team. I would just close by really echoing the chair's points about moving towards limiting fossil fuels, as so many other cities have done. Clearly, there are some challenges in a city like Boston that a town like wouldn't necessarily have, but we really have an opportunity to, and this is something that I think Carl and Allison, and Chief Cook, you guys, Dave, can really help lead, not only setting the conversation going forward, but working collaboratively across departments to really put the focus on renewable, on limiting, on no more traditional fossil fuel infrastructure. It's a public health issue. It's a public safety issue. It's a quality of life issue, and it is certainly an environmental issue. We are seeing now the benefits, where we've seen now for a number of years, but we're seeing as a coastal city particularly the benefit of investing. Boston leads in so many ways. It's the best city in the world as far as I'm concerned, but one thing where I really think that we need to be incredibly aggressive as it relates to our building and our renewable infrastructure. We are so far behind so many southern states, so many more, conservative red states, we're just behind. So this is an opportunity to really put our money where our mouth is. We're talking about the right things. I know we're all in agreement, but we need to be really aggressive and really bold. The recovery from our COVID-19 pandemic is going to be tough. It's going to be difficult, but I see this really as an opportunity to build better, build stronger, build greener, and build healthier. And that's what I'm committed to do. And I know you all are too. So I look forward to working together and being incredibly ambitious and aggressive in the year ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all for this round.
Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. Next up is Councillor Breeden, then Councillor Edwards, and then it'll be Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Breeden. Second round questions?
No, I think I'm done. In the interest of time, I think everyone asked the questions that I was going to ask. So in the interest.
Great. Well, all the better because you're breaking up on us. So, all right, great. Next up, Councillor Edwards, second round questions. Uh-oh, the guy may have lost it. Councillor Edwards? Can folks hear me? Yes, okay, good. Councillor Asabi George.
Oh, and that was quick. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't actually have any questions this round, just trying to listen attentively and do a couple of other things. Thanks.
Excellent. No, this is great. We're trying to move to landmarks. So Council President Janey, and then it'll be Councillor Mejia. Councillor Janey.
Thank you so much. Just to say, once again, thank you to the team. I would appreciate on the earlier question around the contracting, which if my figure is correct, is close to $1 million, a breakdown of the minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses and locally owned businesses for FY20, and then what the projections would be for FY21, and what the plan would be for increasing those numbers in FY21. Again, I appreciate all of the work and look forward to continued partnership. Thank you, Madam Chair. And that can come in, I don't expect, just to clarify, I'm not expecting that here. I appreciate that you don't have those numbers, just as a point of follow-up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. Yes, we'll definitely follow up on behalf of the committee on that front. And now Councillor Mejia. Councillor Mejia, you're muted at the moment.
Because I troll record. So thank you, Chairwoman Bach, for hosting this, and to the team for taking our questions. And I also would like to say thank you so much for answering all of our questions during the working session. It was really helpful to have all of your answers beforehand. So just wanted to thank you all for putting that together. I just have one quick follow-up question in regards to the climate warriors, the resiliency. I forget the name of the title of the folks from around the way that are participating in this project. So I'm just curious as to whether or not those positions are paid, and if you have a budget for outreach and engagement to ensure that there's food and childcare provided to help remove barriers to engagement. I'm just curious whether or not that is part of the work. And then I still just kind of want a little bit of clarity in terms of accountability. It seems like, these stakeholders, the people who are the ones who are creating the pollution in our neighborhoods, I just want to make sure that there is some way of holding them accountable, and that we have some regulations and some things put in place. Because I feel like as a city, we have an opportunity and a responsibility, if we're going to be, green, that we're utilizing all of the tools that we have in our toolkit to hold people accountable. That's it.
Yeah, so we do have a stipend for the leaders. And I forget whether it's $100 or $200. Do you remember, Allison?
I don't, but we can get you that information.
We can get that. And the leaders, when they hold their community events, and in whatever form they think is appropriate, they can use that money for refreshments, for help, for whatever they want to use it for. We give them the responsibility of we ask for a proposal from them, and then we we give them a stipend to support the activities that they think are important. And I absolutely agree with you. You know, we are trying to reach, you know, we do not just go into the community. We are talking with, you know, all sectors of the Boston community about the sources of pollution and sources of emissions.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And thank you, Councillor Mejia. I'll raise a couple more questions briefly, and then we do have two people who have been patiently waiting to testify at the end of this hearing. So I'm going to assume all other councillors are done with questions unless you raise your little blue hand on Zoom. So I just wanted to briefly just ask, it's really following up on Councillor O'Malley's question about the existing buildings. I mean, it's just so much of our stock in Boston is existing and not going anywhere. And frankly, I want it to go anywhere. There's a lot of great historic buildings, which we'll be talking about shortly. So just like a little bit more about what the pathway looks like to really ramp up a program there that wouldn't be a traditional big project capital thing, right? Where you're taking down a school or you're taking down a municipal building, but instead something where we're supporting the retrofitting of an enormous amount of existing building stock across the city. Just would love to hear a little bit more about the trajectory there.
Thank you, Councillor. It may be helpful to hear from Allison about the projects and the cooperation we've had with the Green Ribbon Commission and the building performance standard there.
Sure. So you're absolutely right that not only are existing buildings the lion's share of our emissions, but there's a large diversity of buildings that are going to need to understand how to approach retrofits and decarbonization strategies for those buildings. So we've mentioned a few times earlier the performance standard for large existing buildings. So that would set carbon targets that would decrease over time. So that would be a mechanism by which buildings would have decarbonization targets. That's an important policy element, but just as important are having the support structures and the resources there to support the decarbonization work. So a collaboration we have with the Green Ribbon Commission and a number of other organizations such as the BSA right now is to take some existing buildings that represent the building stock across Boston broadly and understand what would it really take to do a full net zero retrofit, what would be a zero over time path to decarbonize those buildings, so that we can understand what are the tools and technologies. There's a lot of information out there today that's in the architects and engineering community's expertise, where the financing works, how aggressively can decarbonization happen in those buildings, and what are the supportive programs that are needed. So these are a number of actions we're taking, so identified in the Climate Action Plan, and I can give you a lot more detail afterwards offline if that's helpful to understand the details of those processes so that we can build those supportive networks and programs. Just briefly on historic buildings, we understand that historic buildings will present unique challenges, but also important opportunities in the decarbonization space to maintain existing buildings and the embodied emissions that exist in those buildings. So we're working very closely with the Landmarks Commission and the Historic Preservation team that's in the area to understand what pathways and technologies would be for those buildings.
Great, thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'll leave it there. I'll just say I would love to be connected into those processes, and I think I have a district with a lot of buildings that are going to need these kinds of retrofitting, and I would love to be at a table there. And I'll just say that as an addendum, and as a question I brought up, I really think we've got to be figuring out how to move towards better air filtration in buildings, and new and old, and especially. And I just don't feel like, I know we have to wait for the state to put MERV 13 into the building code because it's a state thing, but I also just think it's really bad when you have the science to know that something is making people sick, and then you have a 5 to 10 year lag on actually getting it into the code. And so I just really want to see us do things on that too, just to the air pollution points that other councilors raised. it's a big concern of mine when I was at the Housing Authority, because so many of our public housing tenants live close to highways. But I will end my questions there. I really want to thank the Chief and the Commissioner and Allison and David for being with us today. And to the Chief and the Commissioner, who I know are going to be in more hearings throughout the rest of the day. So before we conclude this one, I want to just recognize I've got two folks who have been waiting to speak. So I'll be recognizing first Frank O'Brien, and then after Frank, it'll be Sarah McCammond. So Frank, you have the floor. Just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Frank O'Brien, Friends of Allendale. I'm going to make two very, I hope, focused and brief points. And I refer the councilors and Chris and his team to the materials that I've submitted. The first point is that I estimate the underspend on the climate resiliency at about 50%, particularly in District 1. I would really encourage the councilors to satisfy themselves that that the budget is adequate to protect our vulnerable residents and neighbors in East Boston. The second point is on the climate, focusing on the climate ready reserve fund. Our recommendation is that it should be increased from 3 to 5, and that there be a very robust community engagement component to make sure that the resources are being directed not just to where they're needed, but to where the residents, the neighbors, ourselves see the need as being. I'll leave it there and look forward to continue working with everyone on this very important series of initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Yes, and we'll also make sure, again, that your submitted testimony, written testimony, and those slides are circulated to everybody. Sarah McCammond.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments. I'll try to keep it very brief as well. As a resident of Fort Point and a member of the Fort Point Neighborhood Association, I live in a neighborhood that's vulnerable to coastal sea level rise and flooding. And the South Boston Coastal Resilient Plan was released in 2018, identifying near-term, mid-term, and long-term sea level and coastal flooding adaptation strategies. Near-term actions have not yet been implemented, and it's really important that these plans be implemented. In addition, FP&A is a member of the Harborfront Neighborhood Alliance, which covers the waterfront neighborhoods of Charlestown, East Boston, South Boston, North End, Downtown, and Dorchester. These neighborhoods either have climate plans or are in the process, such as Downtown, North End, and Dorchester. So climate resilience and adaptive measures are just critical to Harborside residents and neighborhoods. We can't wait years before implementing, and we'd like you to consider ways to accelerate implementation with the necessary allocation of funding. So in addition to the adds to staff we've heard today, we'd like to recommend that a senior level climate resilient position to coordinate, help implement, and communicate between East Boston, Charlestown, South Boston, North End, Downtown, and Dorchester with stakeholders in the community. We know if one property protects their neighbor and their neighbor does not, or not to the same performance standards, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So we'd like to reiterate the need for a coordinated approach, and especially the need to engage the neighborhood. We'd also like to thank Councilors O'Malley and Wu and other advocates and experts, and the mayor for the local wetlands ordinance. And in terms of implementation, we'd like to reiterate the councilors' messages heard today of how important it is that the Commission receives the resources it needs to create policies and procedures, implement and enforce the new local wetlands ordinance. Thank you for your consideration.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And with that, I guess, again, want to just thank the team and say, so if you're watching at home, we are obviously a little bit late to the noon Landmarks Commission budget hearing. We'll pause for 10 minutes and do that start that in 10 minutes, just because we've got enough overlap that I need to give people a chance to stretch their legs. So for councilors, we will definitely be gaveling that in for real just before, just at 12:29. And I'll see you all then shortly. And with that, I'm adjourning this meeting of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. delivery.